going to kind of interview ourselves a little bit about what our latest books are about and where we get our inspiration from. So I will start just by asking you to give just a short summary of Give the Dark My Love and where you got the inspiration from.
So Give the Dark My Love is about a girl who she goes to a medical alchemical academy to learn alchemy that will help save people from a plague that is infesting her whole island that she lives on. And she discovers that when she cannot save the sick, she might as well start raising the dead, as one does. She's not always great at the decision making. And the idea for this came from a lot of different places. And if you read the very first paragraph of my acknowledgments, you find out that I thank Lin-Manuel Miranda, Full Metal Alchemist, and Charlize Theron. And those are my three main sources of inspiration. I watched from Full Metal Alchemist when I was in college, and I really loved the idea of equivalencies and this balance between magic not being something that is free. You have to pay for it. Nothing comes from nothing. You have to pay for it in some way. So that was part of the root of the idea. And then I saw an interview with Charlize Theron and Ellen after Charlize did the movie Snow White and the Huntsman, where Ellen was like, you're this wonderful, sweet lady. How do you embody the evil queen? And she just goes, I think murder. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. I want somebody who thinks murder. And then the whole revolutionary subplot in the book comes directly from Hamilton and listening to that soundtrack on repeat over and over.
I do. When I think of you, I think, Beth thinks about murder a lot.
My brand.
So Grim Lovelies came from me. Some of my other books, if you've read any of my other books, are retellings of different classics. And Grim Lovelies, it's not a retelling, but it's definitely inspired by fairy tales, specifically Cinderella. And I was thinking one day about the mice in Cinderella. And on that night that the fairy godmother comes down and grants Cinderella that beautiful dress, she changes the mice in the story and the other animals into servants. They're like the coachmen for Cinderella. And then midnight comes and Cinderella loses her beautiful dress. And that's tragic and all because I love a beautiful dress. But that's not like the worst thing that could happen, And I was thinking about those animal servants and how they, for the first times in their lives, have suddenly been granted all the gifts of humanity. They can speak, they can have higher intelligence, they can appreciate French pastries, which they do in Grim Lovelies. There's just so many wonderful things about being human, and they only have one night to experience everything. And for them, midnight means losing all of that. And that's much higher stakes than just losing a pretty dress. So I wanted to write about not specifically those animals, but that type of animals. So Grim Lovelies is about characters like that who have been animals that are turned into human servants by a witch in modern day Paris, where there's sort of a hidden magical world. And she has enchanted them into her servants. There's 5 of them. They're called beasties. And she dies. This is not a spoiler. This happens very early on. She dies, and witches' spells fade within 3 days. And so they're going to turn back into animals in 3 days if they don't find another witch to uphold the spell. So it's kind of a race against the clock for them to hold on to their humanity. So for me, it was kind of just about giving some of those minor characters in fairy tales that we all overlook a little bit of their own story.
That was such a good answer, and you have a really deep answer. I'm just like, I keep it classy. So we both have written science fiction. You've also written historical fantasy. What has the switch been like as you shifted genres?
Gosh, I would say writing both. I had one series that was science fiction called the Cage series, which was traditional science fiction, and then now I have this fantasy series, Grim Lovelies. And my first series was historical science fiction that was all based on these Gothic classics. I guess I would say, for me, it's the world. When it comes to the world building, I actually prefer the magical world because no one really expects for it to be plausible. I mean, you still have to have rules, but I know with my first book, the first book was a retelling of The Island of Dr. Moreau, where there's a mad scientist who is through surgery, changing animals into kind of human monster kind of figures. And my editor kept asking me like, well, how does that work? Well, how does the science work? Well, how does he do it? And I'm like, he does it. It's not possible. Like, no one can do that. And so I would just try to, write something that sounded vaguely plausible, but it's like, some of these things aren't possible today. And with magic, it's easier to suspend disbelief. I like establishing rules for magic, and that can be a challenge, but it's totally up to you to invent. You're not like bound to, today's rules.
Yeah.
How about you? How do you feel about science? And I also know that maybe you started writing fantasy.
Maybe did.
Yeah.
That insider knowledge. I had a very, very long road to publication. It took me 10 failed novels before I had one that succeeded. And all 10 of the failed novels were fantasy, and the one that succeeded was sci-fi. And I sort of wrote it out of desperation and with this attitude that nobody would read it, and then that ended up being the one that changed my whole life. But I always loved fantasy. And for me, everybody knew me as a sci-fi author with Across the Universe, my first series. And I always felt like a fantasy author who's kind of posing as a sci-fi author. But now a lot of people are like, oh, you're a sci-fi author posing as a fantasy author. I'm like, it's all mixed up and weird. But yeah, it's the type of research that you do that's different. With sci-fi, I have to research enough to know why we don't have the futuristic thing that I want, and then invent something that makes it work. Whereas in fantasy, I have to invent it all. So no stress there. You just have to literally build the entire world from the ground up. So good times.
I am curious about the magic in your book, like the world building, and what are the rules that you came up with for, because the parts I've read, which I love, there's kind of a academy where they learn the different magical arts. So tell us a little bit about those and how you went about doing the research, especially for the medical arts.
Yeah. So at the Eugen Alchemical Academy, there are 3 types of alchemy that are taught, and alchemy has to go through a crucible, which is like a metal vase, and you put something in and then magic comes out, basically. For the copper crucibles, it's a transaction, so you can hide something in a copper crucible and nobody can get into it until you pay the price, whatever that price may be, and it's like a lock that you only know the key to. Silver is for transforming things, so you can put like a rock inside of a silver crucible and then pull out literally a bunny rabbit. And then the golden crucibles are for healing, and you can transfer pain and take pain away from somebody and sometimes take a disease away as long as you transfer that pain or disease into another living creature. But then there's a 4th alchemy, and that is the alchemy of necromancy and raising the dead, and that requires a crucible made of blood iron. We all have iron in our bloods, and if you don't, you are very anemic and gonna die. So you have iron in your blood. And it was an interesting thing to research, like just how much blood you need to make a little tiny vase. I'm sure if somebody looked at my Google history, they would be deeply concerned. So I'm like, how much do you have to bleed out a human being to get enough iron out of their blood? And, yeah. So good times. Reddit had the answer, in case you're curious, because of course Reddit knows how many people you have to kill for this. And then I did a lot of other medical history, because she does spend a good chunk of the time thinking that she can cure this plague. And fortunately for me, have any of y'all seen Sweet Home Alabama? That's my life. So when I was growing up, my father drugged me to literally every Southern Civil War battlefield in America. I have literally been to every single one, not all the Yankee ones. Those were sacrilege, but I've been to all the Southern ones. And so one of the things I learned about was how, because I would get bored after seeing, the 5th cornfield in a row where people killed each other, and I would look at how the medical side of things went and how that amputation specifically went. And so there's a lot of amputation in my book, and it's all based on the Civil War amputation. So that gives you kind of the time frame and a lack of pain-killing processes for it. How about you?
Well, one thing I've noticed about both of our books in the magical world, in yours, if you want to transfer pain, they often transfer it into a rat.
Mm-hmm.
In my magical system, you can use different life essences. You have to trade a life essence in order to do magic. You have to consume it. And so the witches, for example, the witches in the book, they tend to like flowers. Everything has to be kind of fresh and live, so they'll have flowers and herbs. There's royals, the shadow royals, who are kind of at the head of my magical system. They have what's called powder, and they have these powder smiths that work to take a lot of life essence and convert it into powder. But the goblins have pet rats, and they like to bite their heads off and drink their blood. So my question is, what's up with rats?
So I actually have, there's this scene where Nedra's talking about that, and she makes a point of saying that the only reason they use rats is that they're ugly, and if they had like fuzzy tails like a squirrel, everyone would feel bad about it. And I mean, that's kind of true. There's poor little rats.
In my book, so the goblins, they live in the catacombs of Paris, and all of their life essence that they use is like creatures of the night. So they'll swallow moths, like cave slime, that kind of thing. Like that's what they use for their life essence, and rats. But the rats really are like their pets and their friends, and like they don't like to kill the rats. It's only if they're in a pinch they'll do it. And if they do, they pour out a cup of tea, because they're from London. They pour out a cup of tea in honor of their fallen rat friends.
So I am fascinated by the Paris catacombs. What was researching that like?
Well, unfortunately, I have never been to the Paris catacombs. Yet. I like it.
Field
Thank
trip.
you. Yeah. So I've been to Paris a few times, and I have this really romantic view of Paris because when I was much younger, I had a little Parisian boyfriend. He was a train conductor. He was so cute. And I went to Paris once, and he showed me all around, and we went to all these coffee shops. And I know that Paris is a modern day pretty city for sure, but like my young little innocent teen heart just like thinks of Paris and thinks back on my time with Jerome, and like it's just such a fond memory. I mean, that's why I decided to set it there. And then when I decided to write Grim Lovelies and have it be in Paris, I planned on going back to do more research because even though I'd been, when you're there, you're not there with the eye of an author, and it's totally different when you need to like detail every architectural little setting, and like whenever I go places, I take pictures of like what does the sidewalk look like all the boring stuff. So I had not done that with Jerome. And so I was supposed to go to do more research, but I was very pregnant at the time, and I got sick, and I was not able to go. So my tour of the catacombs was cut short.
Kids mess up everything.
But there's this brilliant thing called Google, and it's pretty amazing. So it was really fun to just do a lot of research and imagine what it would be like to be there, and think about all the bones and goblins having giant goblin raves in the dark, because they can see in the dark naturally. Yeah. Okay, so tell me about, I don't think that this is a standalone, correct?
Correct.
What comes next?
Excellent question. So the next thing is the sequel to this, and I used to have a title for it, and no, I don't have a title for it, so we're still working on that one. And I'm literally working on it like right now. My laptop is in my bag. And so it's gonna be an exciting thing, and it is definitely the end. So for those of you who are worried that I'll expand this, no, this is the end, and the definitive end. What about you?
Grim Lovelies is a duology, so there is a sequel. It's called Midnight Beauties. It's going to come out next fall, and that's the end. I think we'll see if I can convince my publisher to get more books, because when I came up with the world of Grim Lovelies, I just loved the world. Like, all of my books are very premise-based. I love a great premise, like, let's bring back dinosaurs and put them in an amusement park, and then everything goes to hell. Like, that's like brilliant, But with Grim Lovelies, it was a little different. It was really more like this magical world that I loved, and so I just feel like I could write in it for a long time. So I feel like I could come up with more stories. It's just a fun world. So we'll see what happens. Okay, well, one more question. If you could bring back anyone from the dead, who would it be? Let's do historical figure.
Historical figure, ooh. It's a tough one. I would bring back Beethoven and give him an MP3 player. And also hearing aids. But yeah. Yes, I'll do that. I'll do that for Beethoven. Got it covered. What about you?
Let's see. Oh gosh, if I was going to bring back anyone from the dead, that's tough. Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe some famous author. No. Okay, I would bring them back. I would learn their secrets, and then I would kill them all over again and steal their secrets.
Spoken like a true Slytherin. Okay, so in yours you have the beasties, the goblins, the witches, and the royals. Which would you be?
Oh, okay. Okay. Normally I have a quiz. I do school visits, and the kids get to have a quiz to see which one they are. They're you could kind of liken them to Harry Potter houses a little bit. The beasties, being the heroes, are the Gryffindors. The goblins are actually the Hufflepuffs, but like in a very goth way, which I know doesn't make sense, but when you read the book, you'll get it. They love parties. They're social. You know,
Instead
they're
of
sweet.
badgers, they're honey badgers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's see. The Shadow Royals are the Slytherins, all powerful, slightly evil, and then the witches are Ravenclaw because they learn a lot of spells. They have to study a lot to learn their magic. So I don't know. I would actually really like to be a royal. I don't care if I'm a little bit evil. I'll take it. I think I'd probably be a little beastie though. Yeah.
I think I would either be a beastie or a witch. We'd see where I'd started off at.
Witches so there's the 4 magical orders which we talked about in the book, and the beasties, the goblins, and the shadow royals are all born magical, but the witches are actually born human, and they call in the world of Grim Lovelies, there's the magical world which is called the Haute, which is kind of hidden, and then there's the pretty world, and that's the regular boring world that we're all a part of. We're all pretties, and we don't know anything about the Haute. But a few select pretties, and it's always women, it's never men, do learn about it, and through a very dangerous and usually deadly process, can convert themselves into witches. So they have to be some tough ladies to go through with that.
I changed my answer. I'll just be a beastie.
No way! No way. You're all about explosions and coming out through the other side.
I would die.
Okay, well, I think we want to take some questions, but do you want to do a quick reading first? Do you have a little bit you could read from? Okay.
You want me to go first? Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to be lame and read the first of the prologue.
There's no better place than starting at the beginning.
It's actually page 3. I'm shaking things up. Girl, Captain Pasker said in a warning tone, as if even her gender would cause for offense. The doors behind her opened wider. The people who poured out behind the girl seemed unarmed. Most wore hospital dressing gowns, a few wore peasants' clothing. All of them showed some deformity of the plague, withered and blackened hands or feet, an inky stain rising up from their necks under their skin, and they were quiet. They did not speak or even look to the girl as they descended the stairs, as if by pre-agreed formation. They showed no fear. They showed no emotion at all. Captain Pasker's stomach churned. The rifles in the men's hands shook. Steady, Captain Pasker warned, but it did no good. One of the sailors popped off a shot. The bullet aimed true to spike the man's nose. A woman in the front, about 20 steps away, staggered, her shoulders snapping back, the force of the blow causing her to stumble and fall on the steps. Her head smashed against a stone, an audible crack of her skull followed by the crunching sound of broken teeth. The others around her kept moving, completely ignoring her body broken on the steps. And then she stood back up. The woman showed no pain. She opened her mouth and let the splintered teeth clatter to the ground. She ignored the skin that dangled over her broken skull. No blood poured from her wounds. She just kept walking. She was 10 steps away now. 5. Fire! Captain Pasker screamed. Fire! Fire! The guns blossomed in flame, and smoke around him as his men fired shot after shot. Many in the crowd staggered, but none cried out. None fell. The dead could not die.
I've got all the zombie goosebumps. I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay. Okay, I have a section. I'm going to read from not the very beginning either. I'm going to read a section sort of near the back, and I need a volunteer to help me act it out. And I'm pretty sure I can rope Beth into it if none of y'all do it.
No,
but I don't think she wants to.
Someone who's pretty good at volunteering stuff. You want me to volunteer?
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay.
Not
So.
everybody.
Okay. Will you be my lovely volunteer?
Sure, Jane.
Okay. Yes. Come up here.
Do I
Yes, let's sit in the chair together.
You come here. You can take my chair. I'll sit on the couch.
Well, that's okay. We'll sit here. Okay. All right. There. Yes.
Cozy.
Perfect.
That's
Okay.
nice.
So in this scene, the scene is between two of the characters. We have Anouk, who is the main beastie character, that animal turned human servant. She is the witch's maid and chauffeur. You're going to be Anouk. And I am Tenpenny, who is the head of the goblin horde. And right now we are in the catacombs of Paris. Things have not gone well for poor Anouk. Yes, you're having a hard time. And so Tenpenny is going to give her a little bit of his goblin wisdom. Okay, so you are going to play the part of Anouk. Usually I make people wear costumes, so consider yourself lucky. Okay, so. Okay. Oh no, Tenpenny said. Did the poison work too well? Are you actually dead? He sat down next to her and mockingly felt her forehead. Why aren't you celebrating? Is that chauffeur boy giving you trouble? Anouk shook her head.
Even if we can find someone to recast our spell, I'm afraid that a spell alone can't make us human, truly human. Only actions make a person human, not magic.
Yes, Tenpenny said. Well, and the fact that a human doesn't have a tail. Anouk rolled her eyes. And he added, my darling girl, look at you, pale as a slug, drab as pudding. Tonight is not the night to feel depressed at the state of your reality. Here, you need some color. He produced a sleek tube of lipstick and drew on her left cheek, then her right. He sketched a shape, filled it in, licked his finger, and wiped off a smudge.
Oh, no. Oh, heavens. Oh, my God. You gotta look.
Okay, I won't wake you, I promise. Okay. He handed her a mirror, and she looked at herself in it. He'd drawn ruby red hearts on both of her cheeks, though messily. It gave her the look of a performer, and she blended in a little more with the goblins. There now, he said. Fashion is art, and we are the canvas. Do you feel like a piece of art, my dear?
I feel more like that slug you were talking about.
He shook his head. Have you ever heard the story of the goblin and his shadow? No? Many years ago, a goblin angered a minor duke by baking his pet peacock into a pie, mistaking it for a chicken. The duke cursed him. Every day, the goblin started to notice his shadow hung around more, even in the light. It started to grow darker in places, especially around the eyes and nose. His eyes and his nose. When he looked into the mirror, he found that he was fading. His own shadow was trading places with him, stealing his life. He had to live the rest of his days in pure darkness, where there were no shadows, before his swallowed him whole. What I'm saying is, don't let anything, not shadows, not sorrow, not peacocks, steal your brightest days. Thank you so much. You make a beautiful Anouk. I'm going to get a picture with your goblin hearts. All right, we'll take one.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And I'm willing to do goblin hearts on anyone else who would so like them.
Yeah, Rosh?
Okay, so do we have any questions from the audience? Yes.
I'm normally really shy about asking questions, but it's a small group. So I think the hardest part of fantasy writing can be the magic system and building the world. So what are some of you all's techniques for doing that?
For me, the question is, what are our techniques for building the world in a fantasy story? A lot of times I ask myself, what is the worst possible thing that can happen to that specific character? Because that changes for everyone. I mean, this is true of all writing as well. Like in Across the Universe, my main character loves to go cross country running, so I put her on a ship without windows. Yeah, like I like to torture my characters. And so for this one, it was a girl who wants to save people and cannot. And so I had to build up the system around this sort of impossibility and structure the rules in that way.
I think the rules are so important, and magic can never be free. There always has to be a cost. That's the big part. And so it's really just about what's that balance going to be in your magical world. In Grim Lovelies, the magic works so that you have to, I think much like yours, you have to give something. In my case, it's something living, and you get the magic. You have to swallow something living. Whether it's a flower or an herb or a rat or blood or human blood or something, and then you can perform magic.
You're so sympathetic about it. I'm like, kill the rat.
But there's also a thing in the book where you can't take a whole life. If you take a whole life, there's something called the vitae echo, which is sort of that balance, and it's this force where if you take a whole life, it'll turn back on you. And especially like in the case of the witches, every time they do this, their organs will turn to wood or to stone or something like this, or they might even destroy themselves. So the magic handlers in my book can't actually kill anyone, which is a problem because they want to kill everyone, which is maybe why they need people like the beasties. Another question? And yeah, in the back.
Both of you have written 2 short stories in anthologies. Is it harder to write short stories or long stories?
In some ways it is more difficult. In some other ways it's just sort of an abbreviated story. It took a long time for me to realize how to write a short story, and once I sort of learned it, it made it a little easier. But it's a matter of, in a novel, you will ask a question, and if you don't answer it, you at least present enough information for the reader to know the answer. Whereas in a short story, for me, it's all about asking the question.
That's really clever. This is going to change the way I approach novels and short stories, I think. I find short stories really refreshing because they're short, to state the obvious. But, an undertaking of a year or so with a novel, it's so huge. And a short story that you can write in a few weeks or maybe a month, I just love tackling something that small, but it's all about what question are you asking. And some questions I find, I think when I come up with an idea, it's going to be enough for a novel, and I'm so excited, and I start writing it, and 20 pages in, or 30 pages in, or 50 pages in, it's kind of fizzled, and I realized that the idea just really wasn't strong enough to carry a whole novel. And then likewise, I've had ideas for short stories that I've later wanted to turn into whole novels because I realized that there's way more to that initial idea than I thought. So I think it's really just knowing the scope of what you're trying to set out to do.
And to follow up, like you said on that comment, do you own that story and you could go back and do that, or is it not yours anymore? When you want to turn it into a novel, when you decide, hey, I want to.
Yeah, for me it kind of depends. I've actually written a lot of short stories, and some of them have been in the Star Wars universe. From a certain point of view, it's a Star Wars anthology of different Star Wars characters. I could obviously, I don't own those characters, so I couldn't expand upon those. But the ones that are completely for me, I could certainly, if I wanted to, expand upon them.
I think we have rights. It's always tricky when you get to rights. I think it's like for the first year we can't maybe do anything like that.
Oh, yeah.
But then after that, then the stories are ours. Yeah.
Okay, quick question about the crucibles. Regarding the runes on specifically, I know the one on the front cover. Do each of the crucibles have runes, and do the runes, are they just explaining the rules of each crucible, or is it like something deeper and more lore magic-y stuff?
That's a good question. So the runes first of all, they're only visible when the crucible is being used.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just, if it was sitting on a shelf, you wouldn't see any rune at all. And there's sort of prescribed standard ways to draw the runes, and each rune represents a different aspect of the alchemical process that they're doing. However, there are certain ones that you can change them up on. It's almost like an experiment with a recipe. And a very clever alchemist could perhaps add a new rune or put it in a different location and change the effect and the power of it. Thank you.
Okay. Any final questions? Okay. Well, in that case, then I think we're ready to do the raffle.
Yes.
Yes.